Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. It started, as the most life-altering things often do, with a simple question. A question that hung in the air between us, shimmering like heat haze on a summer road, blurring the line between the world I knew and the one I was terrified to discover. "Have you ever wondered," Belle said, her voice a soft murmur that barely disturbed the quiet of our living room, "what it would feel like to live a day in my body?" I froze, my hand, which had been tracing the rim of my water glass, stilled. Every muscle in my body went taut, as if bracing for an impact. It wasn't an accusation, not a joke, not even a casual hypothetical. It was a key, turning in a lock I hadn't even realized was there. A lock deep inside me that I'd spent my entire life pretending didn't exist. How could she know? How could she possibly see the secret fascination I held? The guilty curiosity that made my cheeks burn whenever I caught myself staring a second too long at the way her silk blouse fell across her shoulders, or the gentle curve of her favorite dress hanging on the back of our bedroom door. That dress. It was an ethereal thing, the color of a twilight sky, a soft flowing jade green silk that seemed to breathe on its own. I'd watched her wear it to dinners, to parties, watched it float around her as she moved, and a shameful, persistent thought would whisper in the back of my mind. What would that feel like against my skin? The thought was always followed by a cold wave of self-loathing. I was Roy, a man. Men didn't think such things. I expected her to laugh, or perhaps to look at me with confusion when I didn't answer right away. But she did neither. Belle just watched me, her gaze steady and filled with a terrifying, disarming tenderness. It was an expression that bypassed all my defenses, stripping away the carefully constructed walls of masculinity I hid behind. It was a look that said, "I see you, the real you." "Just for one evening," she said, her voice dropping even lower, becoming a conspiratorial whisper. "Just here, in the house. No one would ever know. I want you to feel free, just for once." Free. The word echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. When was the last time I truly felt free? I lived a life of constraints, of unspoken rules and expectations I placed on myself. Be a man, be strong, don't be emotional, don't be soft. And yet, every time I watched Belle get ready, watched her transform herself with the delicate swipe of a makeup brush or the simple act of stepping into a pair of heels, I felt a pang of something I could only describe as envy. She had access to a world of color, texture, and expression that was utterly forbidden to me. My throat was dry. I managed a hesitant nod, a barely perceptible movement that felt like leaping off a cliff. Her smile wasn't triumphant or teasing. It was gentle, a warm dawn breaking over her features. That smile gave me the courage to follow her into the bedroom. The evening unfolded like a dream, surreal, intoxicating, and terrifying. Belle became a gentle director of this strange new play I was starring in. She didn't just hand me clothes, she curated an experience. She started by laying out a set of her own underwear on the bed, a simple bra made of soft cream-colored lace, and matching panties. "Start with these," she said softly, her tone matter-of-fact, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. My hands trembled as I took them. The fabric was impossibly delicate against my calloused fingertips. Stripping off my own boxers and t-shirt felt like shedding a skin. My body, so familiar and masculine, felt suddenly alien and clumsy under the soft bedroom light. Hooking the bra at the back was a fumbling, awkward ordeal. My fingers felt too big, too stupid. Belle reached out and without a word, fastened it for me, the light pressure of the band around my chest, the unfamiliar sensation of the empty lace cups against my skin. It sent a jolt through me, a mixture of profound shame and a dizzying, electric thrill. Slipping on the panties was even stranger. The silk was cool and smooth, a sensation so foreign compared to the rough cotton I was used to. Next came the stockings. They were sheer, a shade called nude, that was supposed to mimic bare skin. But on my legs, they created a smooth, glossy surface I couldn't stop touching. Belle showed me how to gather the delicate nylon and ease it up my leg, how to clip the lace tops to the delicate straps of a garter belt she produced from a drawer. The whole process was intimate and ritualistic. I felt my skin tingling, every nerve ending awake and alive in a way they had never been before. Then came the dress, the jade green silk. She held it out for me, and I stepped into it. The moment the fabric slithered up my body was a revelation. It was weightless, cool, and fluid. It didn't just hang on me, it moved with me, whispering against my freshly shaved legs with every hesitant step. It felt liberating. There is no other word for it. The rigid confinement of jeans and belts was gone, replaced by a flowing freedom that made me want to twirl, a ridiculous, childish impulse I immediately suppressed. Belle sat me down at her vanity, the surface a beautiful chaos of pots, brushes, and compacts. Just a little, she promised. I watched my own face in the mirror, a stranger's face. As she worked, the cool touch of foundation, the soft dusting of blush on my cheeks that made me look less haggard, more alive. She didn't try to make me look like a woman. She just softened the edges, bringing out a fineness in my features I'd never noticed. The final touch was a light coat of mascara. When she told me to blink, my lashes brushed against my skin, a tiny fluttering sensation that made me feel impossibly delicate. Finally, the shoes. They were elegant, simple black pumps with a slender, 3-inch heel. Getting my feet into them was a struggle, but once I was standing, the world changed. I was taller, my posture instantly corrected. My entire body had to rebalance, a precarious new equilibrium that forced a different way of standing, of holding myself. My center of gravity shifted, and I felt a strange sense of power mixed with vulnerability. When she was done, she stepped back and gestured toward the full-length mirror. I turned, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and anticipation. And then I saw her. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. The person in the mirror was a stranger, an elegant, impossibly tall woman with my eyes. My face was there, but it was softened, framed by the long, dark wig Belle had gently placed on my head. My shoulders, which I always saw as broad and clumsy, seemed somehow less so under the delicate cut of the dress. My legs looked long and shapely in the sheer stockings and heels. The person in the mirror looked hesitant, shy, and scared. But beneath that, there was a glimmer of something else, a flicker of joy. Belle came to stand behind me, her chin resting on my shoulder as she looked at our reflection. Her voice was a warm breath against my ear. "You know," she said, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror, "you know she is beautiful." A laugh escaped my lips. It was a strange, choked sound, halfway between a sob and a genuine expression of mirth. But for that single, fleeting second, as I looked at the stranger in the mirror, as I felt the silk of the dress against my skin and Belle's arms around me, the laughter felt real. It felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for a very, very long time. It felt like freedom. That first night should have been an anomaly, a strange and daring experiment to be locked away in a box labeled "that one time." It should have been enough to satisfy my curiosity. A single dip into a forbidden ocean before retreating to the safety of the shore. But it wasn't. It was like tasting a flavor you never knew existed and finding yourself craving it at the most unexpected times. A few days later, as we were washing dishes, Belle broke the comfortable silence. "Do you want to try again?" she asked, her tone so casual it was as if she were asking if I wanted coffee. I fumbled the plate I was drying, my knuckles turning white. My mind screamed no. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But my heart, that traitorous organ, gave a frantic, hopeful leap. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded, my eyes fixed on the soapy water. And so it began, our secret ritual, dress-up nights. We called them, a playful, innocent name for something that was becoming profoundly serious for me. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was an exploration, a pilgrimage into an undiscovered country within myself. And Belle was my unwavering guide. The second time was different from the first. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a focused, intense curiosity. The fumbling shame was still there, a hot blush that crept up my neck, but it was accompanied by a powerful undercurrent of excitement. Belle seemed to sense this shift. She became my teacher. That night, she laid out a new ensemble. It was a simple, classic outfit, a black pencil skirt that hugged my hips, a soft cream-colored satin blouse that felt like liquid against my torso, and a pair of killer red heels. The underwear was more daring this time, a lacy red bra and panty set. As I fastened the bra myself, my fingers only slightly clumsy now, I felt a surge of competence. I was learning. Makeup is about enhancing, not hiding, she explained as she sat me at the vanity again. Her touch was patient and precise. She showed me how to apply foundation evenly, how to use a concealer pencil to soften the shadow of my beard. Even after a close shave, see, you just pat, you don't rub. I watched, mesmerized, as she taught me about the subtle power of eyeliner, the way a thin, dark line could reshape the eye, make it seem more open, more expressive. I tried to do the other eye myself, my hand shaking, creating a jagged, clumsy line. I swore under my breath, frustrated. "Hey," she said gently, taking my hand, "it takes practice. For months. I looked like a raccoon every time I tried a smoky eye." She fixed it with a practice flick of a cotton swab, and her easy grace made me feel less like a clumsy oaf. The most difficult lesson was walking. The red heels were higher than the black pumps, a full 4 inches that felt like stilts. My first few steps were a disaster. I lurched, my ankles wobbling precariously. I felt like a newborn foal, all sharp angles and no coordination. I ended up collapsing onto the bed in a heap of uncoordinated limbs, the satin blouse rustling around me. I expected her to laugh, but she just smiled and held out her hand. "It's okay. The trick is to shift your weight to the balls of your feet and lead with your hips, not your shoulders. Let your body find its own rhythm." We spent the next hour just walking back and forth across our bedroom. She walked beside me, her own movements a symphony of fluid grace. Straight back, shoulders relaxed, hands soft. She coached, slowly, painfully. Something started to click. The lurching walk smoothed into a hesitant but more controlled stride. The clicking of my heels on the hardwood floor became a steady, rhythmic sound. It was the sound of progress. Each session became a new lesson. We experimented with different clothes, different personas. One night, I was sophisticated in a little black dress and pearls. Another, I was more casual in skinny jeans, a flowy top, and wedge sandals. Each outfit taught me something new about how clothes could change not just how you looked, but how you felt, how you moved, how you occupied space. The constriction of the pencil skirt forced a shorter, more deliberate stride. The freedom of a summer dress encouraged a lighter, more carefree movement. It was during our 4th or 5th session that something truly shifted inside me. Belle had picked out a soft lavender cashmere sweater and a simple A-line skirt. She'd helped me style a blonde wig into soft waves that brushed my shoulders, as she was fastening a delicate silver necklace around my neck, her fingers cool against my skin. I caught my reflection in the vanity mirror. For a long moment, I just stared. The person looking back at me wasn't Roy playing dress-up anymore. The lines of fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by a quiet serenity. The eyes seemed softer, the smile less forced. There was a harmony to the image, a sense of completeness that I had never, ever felt when looking at my own male reflection. It was a strange and overwhelming sensation, like finding a piece of your soul you never knew was missing. Without thinking, I whispered, "I don't know why, but when I look like this, I feel correct." The word hung in the air between us. Correct. Not beautiful, not pretty, not even convincing. Just correct. As if my entire life up to this point had been a puzzle with the pieces jammed into the wrong places. And for the first time, one of them had finally slid into its proper spot with a satisfying click. Belle stopped fussing with the necklace and met my eyes in the mirror. Her expression was full of a profound understanding that brought tears to my eyes. She didn't question it. She didn't dismiss it. She just reached out and squeezed my hand. "Then don't be afraid of that feeling," she said, her voice firm and sure. From that day forward, the line between Roy and this other person began to blur. I let my hair grow out, telling my coworkers at the accounting firm that I was just lazy about getting it cut. I started paying more attention to skincare, secretly using Belle's moisturizers and cleansers. The rough, calloused indifference I had towards my body began to transform into a careful, nurturing attention. I started choosing softer fabrics for my male clothes, cashmere blends, merino wool, Pima cotton, small, imperceptible changes that no one else would notice. But for me, They were lifelines, little threads connecting me to the person I was becoming in the privacy of our home. The shame hadn't vanished entirely. It was a stubborn ghost that still whispered in my ear, telling me I was a freak, a fraud. But now, there was a new voice, a quieter but more insistent one. It was the voice that spoke of feeling correct, and for the first time in my life, I was starting to listen. The two lives I was leading couldn't stay separate forever. It was like trying to keep two colors of ink from bleeding into each other on a wet page. The vibrant, secret world I shared with Belle began to seep into the muted, grayscale existence of my everyday life as Roy. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was a gravitational pull, an inevitability. The changes started small. I'd catch my reflection in a shop window and instinctively check my posture, pulling my shoulders back and straightening my spine, just as Belle had taught me. I found myself gesturing with more grace, my hands moving with a fluidity that felt natural, only to quickly shove them in my pockets when I realized what I was doing, at work. I filed a request to be moved to a cubicle further from the main thoroughfare, craving a privacy I'd never needed before. The boisterous, backslapping camaraderie of my male colleagues began to feel abrasive, like coarse sandpaper on raw skin. Their casual talk about sports and cars felt like a foreign language I had once been fluent in but now struggled to comprehend. My body was becoming a source of constant conflict. Shaving my face every morning felt like an act of betrayal. I'd stare at my jawline, that symbol of masculinity, and feel a deep sense of alienation. In the shower, I started shaving my legs and chest regularly, not just on dress-up nights. The feeling of smooth skin under my clothes became a secret comfort, a small act of rebellion against the body I was born into. The sensation of my boring male trousers against my bare legs felt wrong, a constant, irritating reminder of the silk stockings I'd rather be wearing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was a miserable, rainy day, and I had a quarterly review with my boss, a condescending man named Mark, who saw any form of sensitivity as a weakness. The meeting was brutal. He tore apart my latest report, not on its merits but on my approach, calling it too nuanced and not aggressive enough. Every word was a thinly veiled jab at my character. I walked out of his office feeling hollowed out, as if he'd scooped out whatever was left of my confidence. I went to the men's restroom and stood in front of the mirror under the harsh fluorescent lights. I saw Roy, tired, defeated Roy, with his 5 o'clock shadow already starting to show, his shoulders slumped inside a stiff, collared shirt, his tie feeling like a noose. And I just broke. I didn't sob or shout. It was a quiet, internal shattering. The reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a costume, a role I had been playing for 34 years, and I was exhausted. I was done. The lie was too heavy to carry anymore. The person I was in secret, the one who felt vibrant and alive and correct, that was the real person. Roy was the mask. I drove home in a daze, the rain blurring the world outside into meaningless streaks of light. I walked into the house and found Belle in the kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She took one look at my face and the cheerful expression slid from hers. "Roy, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak. The words were caught in my throat, a tangled knot of fear and confession. I just stood there, dripping water on the floor, my whole body trembling. She came to me, her hands warm on my cold, wet arms. "Talk to me. Honey, please." My voice, when it finally came out, was a ragged, broken whisper. "I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "This," I said, gesturing vaguely at myself, at my suit, at my life, pretending, being him. She led me to the couch and sat with me, holding my hand as I finally let everything pour out. I told her about the meeting with my boss, about the profound sense of wrongness I felt every single day, the exhaustion of performing a version of myself that felt like a lie. I told her that the nights we spent together weren't a game or a fantasy anymore. They were the only time I felt real. When I finally ran out of words, I sat there, spent and terrified, waiting for her judgment, for the flicker of fear or disgust in her eyes, for her to tell me that this was too much, that I needed help, that this wasn't what she signed up for. Instead, she was silent for a long moment, her thumb stroking the back of my hand, Then she asked a question, the same one I had been asking myself in the darkest corners of my mind. "Have you ever thought," she began, her voice incredibly soft, "that you might not be him at all, that maybe you're someone else?" A tear I hadn't realized was there slid down my cheek all the time. I choked out, I feel like I'm supposed to be a woman." Admitting it out loud was like setting off a flare in the dead of night. It was terrifyingly bright, painfully exposing, but it was also a beacon, a point of truth in a life of confusion. Belle pulled me into a hug, and I buried my face in her shoulder, finally letting the sobs come. They were wrenching. Painful sounds ripped from the deepest part of me. She held me through it all, her embrace a steady anchor in my storm. "It's okay," she murmured into my hair. "It's okay. You're not someone else. You're just becoming yourself." Later that evening, after the storm had passed and a fragile calm had settled over me, we talked more, not about the problem, but about the future. For the first time, we talked about this other person not as a fantasy, but as a reality. "If you could be her," Belle asked, "who would she be? What would her name be?" I had thought about it before. In fleeting secret daydreams, I'd browse baby name websites in incognito mode, my heart pounding with every click. One name had always stood out, a name that felt like silk and strength, like blooming flowers after a long winter. "Rosalie," I said. The name felt strange and wonderful on my tongue. It felt like coming home. Her name is Rosalie. Belle smiled, a real radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Rosalie," she repeated, testing it out. "I love it. It's beautiful." In that moment, Roy didn't die. He simply receded. He was a character whose part had been played, and as I sat there, holding the hand of the woman I loved, I felt the first, terrifying, exhilarating flicker of a new life beginning. I was not Roy, a man who felt like a woman. I was Rosalie, a woman who had been forced to live as a man, and my journey was just beginning. Choosing the name was the first step. Living up to it was the mountain I now had to climb. The decision to transition wasn't a single, dramatic moment, but a series of 1,000 small, terrifying acts of courage. Rosalie was no longer a secret kept within the four walls of our home. She was a reality I had to build, brick by painstaking brick. Our first call was to a gender therapist Belle found through an online LGBTQ+ support network. My hand shook so badly I could barely dial the number. Speaking to the receptionist, saying the words "I'm seeking therapy for gender dysphoria" out loud to a stranger felt like standing naked in a town square. But the voice on the other end was kind and professional, and an appointment was made. Walking into that therapist's office for the first time was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was still presenting as Roy. I didn't have the courage to do otherwise, and I felt like a complete imposter. I sat in the waiting room, convinced everyone was staring, that they could see right through my drab male clothes to the lacy underwear I had deliberately worn beneath them as a small, secret source of strength. Dr. Anya Sharma was a warm, gentle woman with eyes that held no judgment, in her office for the first time with someone other than Belle. I told my story. I talked about the suffocating wrongness, the secret joy of dressing up, the moment of breaking down. I told her my name. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Rosalie," she said, and hearing her say it, so calmly, so respectfully, was like a balm on a wound I didn't even know was bleeding. Those sessions became my sanctuary. Dr. Sharma gave me the language to understand my own feelings. She explained gender dysphoria not as a mental illness, but as a profound disconnect between one's mind and body. She helped me unpack decades of shame and fear. After several months of therapy, she gave me the referral I'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure, a letter of recommendation for hormone replacement therapy, or HRT. The endocrinologist's office was cold and clinical, a stark contrast to the warmth of Dr. Sharma's space. But Dr. Evans was thorough, explaining the effects of estrogen and testosterone blockers in meticulous detail. He talked about skin softening, fat redistribution, breast development, decreased muscle mass, and a host of emotional changes. He also warned me about the risks, the permanent infertility being the most significant. Belle and I had already had long, tearful conversations about this. We didn't have children, and now we knew we never would, at least not biologically. It was a grief we had to process together, another sacrifice on the altar of my authenticity. "I chose you," she told me one night, her hand resting over my heart. "Whatever form you come in, you are my family." My first dose of hormones was unceremonious. It was a small, blue pill spironolactone, a testosterone blocker, and a tiny patch I placed on my hip, which would slowly release estrogen into my system. I stared at them in my palm for a full minute. These tiny things that held the power to remake me from the inside out, with Belle holding my hand. I swallowed the pill and pressed the patch to my skin. Nothing happened right away. For the first few weeks, the only change was a sense of profound hope. Then, the subtle shifts began. The first thing I noticed was my sense of smell. Suddenly, the world was a riot of aromas I'd never registered before. The scent of rain on hot asphalt, the specific fragrance of Belle's shampoo, the richness of coffee brewing. It was all amplified, more intense. Then came the emotional changes. I became softer. The emotional armor I had worn my entire life began to crack. A sad commercial could bring tears to my eyes. A beautiful piece of music could make my chest ache with a joy so intense it was painful. I was feeling the world without a filter for the first time, and it was overwhelming and beautiful. The physical changes came more slowly, a gradual tide reshaping the coastline of my body. My skin lost its roughness, becoming smoother and more sensitive to the touch. The sparse hair on my chest and back began to thin. I would spend hours just stroking my own arms, marveling at the newfound softness. Around the 3-month mark, I felt the first pangs of breast development. It started as a deep ache behind my nipples, which became incredibly sensitive. Then small, firm buds began to form. I remember the first time I noticed them in the mirror. They were tiny, barely there, but I cried with a joy so pure it felt holy. They were proof my body was finally listening. Not all the changes were easy. The decrease in muscle mass left me feeling weaker, and my metabolism slowed. I had to start watching what I ate for the first time in my life. The emotional volatility could be draining, and there were days I felt like a teenager going through a second, far more confusing puberty. There were nights filled with doubt, where I'd lie awake, feeling the strange new aches in my body, and a wave of panic would wash over me. What am I doing? Am I destroying my life? But then Belle would roll over, wrap her arms around me and murmur, "It's okay, Rosalie, you're just growing." And she was right. It was a second Genesis. I was a work in progress, and the process was messy and painful and utterly breathtakingly miraculous. My reflection was changing. The face looking back at me was still mine, but the angles were softening. My cheeks seemed fuller, my eyes larger. I was slowly, finally, starting to see her. I was starting to see myself. The longer I was on hormones, the harder it became to live a double life. The physical changes were becoming undeniable. My small but growing breasts were difficult to hide under my old work shirts, and my face had softened to a point where I was starting to get ma'am from strangers even when I was dressed as Roy. The dissonance was becoming unbearable. I was Rosalie on the inside, in my heart and in my home, but the world still saw a man. The time had come to step out of the shadows. The first step was telling my parents. It was a conversation I had dreaded my entire life. They were good people, but conservative, from a generation that didn't talk about things like this. I wrote them a long, heartfelt letter, explaining everything, and then drove to their house with Belle for moral support. I sat at their familiar kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten breakfast at for 18 years, and watched them read it. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. My father's face became an unreadable mask of stone. The conversation that followed was painful. It was full of confusion, fear, and questions I couldn't fully answer. "But you were such a normal boy," my mother cried, as if my entire childhood had been a lie. My father was mostly silent, his jaw tight. "I don't understand this," he said finally. "I just don't understand." I didn't expect them to understand. Not right away. I just asked for their love. "I'm still your child," I said, my voice thick with emotion. That's the one thing that hasn't changed. I left their house that day with no easy resolution, only a fragile hope. It was a start. The next hurdle was work. I couldn't keep hiding. with the help of my therapist. I scheduled a meeting with Human Resources and my boss, Mark. It was the most terrifying meeting of my life. I walked in dressed in a simple but professional woman's blouse and slacks, my hair pulled back, wearing light makeup. I explained my situation calmly and professionally. Using the language Dr. Sharma had taught me, I informed them that I was a woman, that I was undergoing a medical transition, and that from this day forward, I would be living and working as Rosalie. The HR manager, a woman I barely knew, was surprisingly supportive. Immediately discussing the logistics of changing my name and email in the system, Mark, however, was dumbfounded. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The condescending smirk wiped clean from his face. To his credit, he said nothing overtly cruel. He just nodded and said, "Okay, we'll adjust." The following Monday was my first day as Rosalie. Walking from my car to the office building felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Every stare felt like a judgment. The whispers as I passed cubicles were like tiny daggers. Some people were kind, offering a quiet, "It's good to see you, Rosalie." Others avoided my gaze completely. The women's restroom felt like a foreign country I was visiting for the first time, and I was terrified of being seen as an intruder. But I survived. Day by day, it got easier. The novelty wore off, and my colleagues slowly began to see me as just another accountant who was good at her job. I was no longer the office gossip. I was just Rosalie. The true test, however, was venturing out into the world not for an appointment or for work, but just to live. My first real outing was a simple trip to the grocery store with Belle. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I chose my outfit with painstaking care, a simple white sundress, flat sandals, and a straw bag. I wanted to look unremarkable, to blend in. Every moment in that store was a heightened state of awareness. I was conscious of the way I walked, the pitch of my voice when I asked an employee where the almond flour was, the way other shoppers' eyes would glance at me and then quickly look away. I was waiting for the pointing, the laughter, the sneer, the slur. But it never came. People were busy with their own lives. They were comparing prices, trying to remember what was on their list, wrangling their children. I was just another woman in a sundress buying groceries on a Saturday afternoon. The moment of truth came at the checkout. The cashier was a young woman with pink hair and a bored expression. She scanned my items, her movements automatic. Then she looked up at me and said, "I love your dress." I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a moment. "Oh," I finally managed, a blush creeping up my neck. "Thank you." "Have a great day, ma'am," she said, handing me my receipt. I walked out of the store and into the bright sunshine, my heart feeling like it was going to burst. Belle squeezed my hand. "See," she whispered. It wasn't a parade or a standing ovation. It was something much smaller and infinitely more profound. It was a simple throwaway compliment from a stranger. It was acceptance. It was a smile and the word ma'am. It was a confirmation that the world could see what I was finally seeing in the mirror. Not a man in a dress, not a person in transition, just Rosalie. And as the warm sun hit my face, I felt, for the first time, like I was truly, finally, home in my own skin. As I settled into my life as Rosalie, the nature of my relationship with Belle began to transform in ways I never could have anticipated. Our love had been the crucible in which my new identity was forged. But now, with the crucible's work done, the metal itself had to be tested. We were no longer a conventional man and woman. We had stepped off that map entirely, into a new, uncharted territory. Our intimacy changed. It became less about established roles and more about a raw, vulnerable connection between two souls. There was a period of awkwardness, a relearning of each other's bodies. My body was different now. It was softer, more sensitive, and responded in new ways. The old dynamics we had taken for granted were gone, and we had to find a new rhythm, a new language of touch and desire. It was Belle who led the way. With the same patience and grace she had shown me from the very beginning, she explored my changing body with a sense of wonder and reverence. Not as something lost, but as something gained. She would trace the new, softer curves of my hips, or gently cup my small, tender breasts, and look at me with an adoration that took my breath away. "You're so beautiful," she would whisper. And I knew she wasn't just talking about my physical form. She was talking about the spirit she had helped set free. Our love became deeper, more profound. It had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger, purer. We were no longer just lovers. We were partners, in the truest sense of the word. Co-conspirators in the beautiful crime of becoming ourselves. We had seen each other at our most broken and our most triumphant. She had held me when I sobbed with dysphoria, and she had celebrated with me when I legally changed my name. There were no secrets between us. The world, of course, now saw us as a same-sex couple. We would get stares when we held hands in public. The same kind of looks I used to fear for different reasons, but now they felt different. They were external, an us against the world feeling that only bound us closer together. I had fought so hard to be seen as a woman. I would not now be afraid to be seen as a woman who loved another woman. About 2 years after I began my transition, on a perfect autumn afternoon, we went for a walk in the park where we'd had our first date. The leaves were turning, painting the landscape in fiery shades of red and gold. We sat on a bench by the lake, the same one where a nervous young man named Roy had first told Belle he was falling in love with her. My heart was hammering, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from a powerful, overwhelming love. I had spent so much of my life receiving Belle's support, her patience, her love. Now, I wanted to give something back, a promise, a symbol of a future we had built together against all odds. I turned to her, taking both of her hands in mine. They felt so familiar, so right. "Belle," I began, my voice a little shaky. "The man who sat on this bench with you all those years ago, he doesn't exist anymore. He was a shadow. You helped me step out of that shadow and into the sun. You gave me my life. You gave me. Tears were already glistening in her eyes. "You taught me how to be brave," I continued, my own voice thick with emotion. "You showed me what unconditional love really looks like. Every good, true, and beautiful part of me exists because you saw it first. You loved Rosalie long before I even knew her name." My hand trembled as I reached into my purse. I pulled out a small, velvet box. It wasn't a conventional engagement ring. Inside was a simple, elegant band of white gold, intertwined with another of rose gold, symbolizing our 2 lives, forever linked. "I know our life isn't what you probably imagined it would be," I whispered, "but it's real. And I want to spend every day of the rest of it showing you how grateful I am, Belle. You are my home. You are my heart. I was reborn because of your love, but I want to spend the rest of my life living it with you." I finally managed to get the words out, the question that held my entire world in its balance. "Will you marry me?" She was crying freely now, tears of joy streaming down her face. She didn't even look at the ring. Her eyes were locked on mine. She threw her arms around my neck, her answer a choked sob against my shoulder. "Yes, of course. Yes." We held each other for a long time, 2 women on a park bench, surrounded by the beauty of a dying season that promised a new spring. It wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. We were no longer defined by the gender I was assigned at birth or the roles society had tried to force upon us. We were defined only by the love that had guided us through the darkness and into this beautiful, sunlit place. Our wedding day was nothing like I had ever dreamed of, because I had never dared to dream of it. The very idea of me, Rosalie, as a bride, was a fantasy that had been too wild, too audacious to even consider, and yet here it was, a reality bathed in the soft glow of a perfect June afternoon. We chose to have the ceremony in the botanical gardens, a place of vibrant life and gentle beauty. There was no long aisle, no grand cathedral, no rigid tradition. There was just a circle of our closest friends and family, gathered under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, its leaves whispering in the light breeze. My wedding dress was simple, elegant, and perfect. It was an ivory, floor-length gown made of crepe that skimmed my body, with delicate lace sleeves that covered my shoulders. It wasn't extravagant, but when I had tried it on in the bridal shop, I had seen a bride in the mirror, not a man playing a part, but a woman, radiant and filled with love. I felt beautiful. As I got ready in a small anteroom with Belle, the air was thick with a happy, nervous energy. She wore a stunning pantsuit in a deep sapphire blue, her hair styled in elegant waves. We had decided to walk down the short, grassy path together, hand in hand. There was no giving away. We were walking into our future as equals, as partners who had already proven their commitment 1,000 times over. Before we stepped out, she turned to me, her eyes shining. "You remember that first night," she whispered, her hands finding mine, "with the green silk dress?" I nodded, a smile playing on my lips. How could I ever forget? "When I saw you in that dress," she said, her voice full of wonder, "even with the awkwardness and the fear in your eyes, I saw a glimpse of her. I saw the woman who was meant to be, and she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." Her words were the only blessing I needed. We squeezed each other's hands and stepped out into the sunshine. The moment I saw my mother sitting in the front row, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Our journey since that painful day in her kitchen had been slow and difficult, filled with halting conversations and cautious steps, but she had tried. She had read books. She had gone to a support group for parents of transgender children, and she had, in her own way, learned to replace her fear with love. As I passed, she looked at me, her face wet with tears, but her eyes held nothing but pride. She saw her daughter. That single look of acceptance was a wedding gift more precious than gold. My father sat beside her, his expression still reserved, but he met my gaze and gave me a small, firm nod. It was enough. Standing under the oak tree, surrounded by the scent of roses and honeysuckle, we said our vows. They weren't recited from a book. They were words we had written ourselves, promises that spoke of our unique journey. Belle spoke of love's power to transcend all boundaries, of her promise to always be my anchor and my harbor. When it was my turn, I looked into her eyes, the beautiful, loving eyes that had seen me when I couldn't even see myself. "I promise," I said, my voice shaking but clear, "to honor the courage it took for us to find this place. I promise to never forget the man who was brave enough to let me go, and to cherish the woman who was patient enough to wait for me. I promise to love you, not just as my wife, but as my savior, my best friend, and the other half of my soul. I am who I am because you love me." When we exchanged rings, my hands were trembling, but my heart was completely, utterly calm as the officiant pronounced us wives, and Belle leaned in to kiss me. The applause from our friends and family was a joyful wave that washed over us. It was a sound of celebration, of acceptance, of love winning. Later that evening, at our small reception, I looked around the room at the smiling faces, our friends, who had embraced me without question, Belle's family, who had welcomed me as their own, my own parents, now tentatively talking with our guest. This was my life. This was my community. I wasn't an outcast or a secret. I was Rosalie, a woman, a wife, surrounded by people who loved me, and it was more than I had ever thought possible. Our honeymoon was a quiet week in a small cabin by the ocean. There were no grand adventures or exotic locales. We didn't need them. All we needed was the peace, the quiet, and each other. We spent our days walking on the beach, our nights curled up by the fireplace, talking for hours or simply sitting in a comfortable, contented silence. On our last night, after Belle had fallen asleep, I found myself standing in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom. The moon was bright, casting a silvery light through the window, illuminating the room in a soft glow. I was wearing one of Belle's old silk nightgowns, a simple slip of a thing that felt impossibly soft against my skin. I just stood there for a long, long time and looked. I saw the woman in the mirror, not the stranger from that first night, full of fear and confusion, not the work in progress, with her shifting features and emotional turmoil. I saw a woman whose body was finally in harmony with her soul. My hair, now long enough to brush my shoulders, was soft around a face that had shed its harsh angles. My eyes, I realized, were the same, but they held a new light, a depth that spoke of battles fought and won. I saw the gentle slope of my shoulders, the soft curve of my breasts, the gentle flare of my hips. It was not the body of a model or a movie star. It was just a body, my body, and for the first time, looking at it felt like looking at a cherished friend, not an enemy, There was no disconnect, no static, no dysphoria. There was only peace. I thought back to Roy, the man I used to be. I didn't feel anger or hatred towards him anymore. I felt a quiet, gentle pity. He had been so lost, so trapped in a role he was never meant to play. He had carried my pain for so long, and I was grateful to him for his strength, for keeping me safe until I was ready to emerge. He had been the tough, closed seed pod that had to break open for the flower to bloom. The journey had been long and arduous. It had cost me things, and it had left scars, both visible and invisible, but standing there, in the quiet moonlight, I knew without a single shred of doubt that it had all been worth it. Every tear, every moment of fear, every painful conversation, it had all led me to this moment of profound, unshakable peace. Belle stirred in her sleep, murmuring my name. I turned from the mirror and slipped back into bed beside her, curling into the warmth of her body. She instinctively wrapped her arms around me, holding me close. I was no longer a secret, a project, or a puzzle to be solved. I wasn't defined by my past or by the body I was born into. I was defined by the love that surrounded me and the truth that now lived in my heart. My name is Rosalie. I am a woman. I am a wife. I am loved. And I am free. And my life, my real life, has only just begun.